Instead, Truman faced disaster. And in the days after the Chinese attack, he drifted.
This was the darkest time of his years in the presidency. It was a very bleak prospect that the American people faced. And the president was being besieged on all sides.
On December 5th, his beloved friend and press secretary, Charlie Ross, died of a heart attack. Truman had known Ross since high school, and the sudden loss of his lifelong friend was a terrible blow.
And Truman was deeply upset, deeply distraught. And that was the same night that the president's daughter, Margaret Truman, was having a first concert ever singing in Constitution Hall in Washington.
Margaret had studied to become a singer, and the grieving president kept his promise to hear her perform. His pent-up frustrations waiting like a stick of dynamite, ready to explode. Paul Hume, the Washington Post's respected music critic, had no idea what was in store for him as he joined the sellout crowd.
Here were the members of the Congress, the Supreme Court, all the big shots. They were all there to hear her sing, which would have been wonderful had she been able to sing well. As soon as she started to sing, I could tell that she did not have the basic technical control of the voice that you need. The pitch wasn't there, the tone wasn't there. She just didn't have what it took. I would have been thrilled if I could have written a rave review. What I wrote was, she is flat a good deal of the time, more last night than at any time we have heard her in past years. There are few moments in her recital when one can relax and feel confident that she will make her goal, which is the end of the song.
The next day, Truman opened the Washington Post to page 12 and found Paul Hume's devastating critique of his daughter's singing. The president erupted. Furious, he dashed off a scathing response.
The letter came in, and I opened it up, and I couldn't believe it, and I gasped.
I've just read your lousy review of Margaret's concert. Someday I hope to meet you. When that happens, you'll need a new nose, a lot of beefsteak for black eyes, and perhaps a supporter below.
That's strong language from the President of the United States.
When the letter became public, newspapers across the country berated the president for his lack of self-control. The Chicago Tribune even questioned Truman's mental competence and emotional stability.
He was a man who was being battered and besieged from every side. He had to blow his stack about something, it seems to me, and the something was Paul Hume's review.
The White House was flooded with letters and telegrams. One letter came from distraught parents who enclosed a Purple Heart. As you have been directly responsible for the loss of our son's life in Korea, Truman read, you might just as well keep this emblem. One major regret is that your daughter was not there to receive the same treatment as our son. By early 1951, the communists had retaken Seoul and Incheon and driven MacArthur's forces below the 38th parallel. Again, the general urged the president to widen the war. Again, the president refused. Then, on January 25th, the longest retreat in American military history ended. MacArthur's bleak assessments had been wrong. His field commander, General Matthew Ridgway, took United Nations forces on the offensive. Assaulting the communists with tanks and artillery, Ridgway began driving them back. By the end of March, forces under Ridgway's command had reached the 38th parallel once again. There, the war stalemated. More than 50,000 American soldiers had been killed or wounded. South Korean casualties numbered over 160,000. Truman cautiously began exploring the possibility of negotiations with the Chinese to stop the fighting and restore a divided Korea.
What Truman wanted and what the American policymakers wanted was to get out of there as decently as we could.
At just that moment, MacArthur stepped in and undermined the president's plan. The general issued his own proclamation demanding the Chinese commander surrender to him. The president was in a rage. MacArthur had wrecked his hope for negotiations. "I was ready to kick him into the North China Sea," Truman said later. "I was never so put out in my life."
I guess in the back of his mind, MacArthur figured, this is a captain of artillery. What does he know about this war? And in Truman's mind, I'm the president. I decide American foreign and military policy.
With General MacArthur making more and more statements that were calling into question national policy, some of Truman's advisors began to urge that he relieve the general. Well, that's something you just don't casually do. You don't relieve a commander in the field in the midst of major hostilities.
But when MacArthur sent a letter to the House Minority Leader criticizing the president's conduct of the war, Truman had had enough. "This looks like the last straw," he wrote in his diary. "Rank insubordination."
Truman knew the firestorm he would face. He knew he would be attacked in the press. But he also knew that eventually the people and history would see that he had done the right thing.
On April 11th, MacArthur was having lunch in Tokyo when his wife handed him a brown Signal Corps envelope. "I deeply regret," the message read, "that it becomes my duty as President and Commander-in-Chief of the United States Military Forces to replace you as Supreme Commander." Truman had fired one of the most popular generals in American history.
And he did it very abruptly, and he did it knowing full well what would happen.
MacArthur came home to a hero's welcome. On Capitol Hill, Republicans attacked Truman. Senator Joseph McCarthy told a press conference, "The son of a bitch ought to be impeached." The president was deluged with wild telegrams, denouncing him as a pig, a little man, a Judas.
Who was he, this little pipsqueak captain from World War I, to fire the great, beloved, awesome General MacArthur?
MacArthur is received in a tumultuous fashion in every city. Ticker tape parades. Joint session of Congress, he addressed the Congress, he made that famous speech.
But I still remember the refrain of one of the most popular barrack ballads of that day, which proclaimed most proudly that old soldiers never die. They just fade away.
Old soldiers never die, they simply fade away. I've never been quite sure what that meant, but it sounds great.
And like the old soldier of that ballad,
Truman wasn't listening.
I now close.
As MacArthur spoke, the president met with his Secretary of State, then took a nap. Later, he read what the general had said and privately remarked, "It's a bunch of damn bullshit."
Truman took it all in stride. He said, "This will blow over, bring the general home, let him have his ticker tape parades, that's okay. All this will be gone in a few months, and it was.
The stalemate in Korea continued. On July 10, 1951, peace talks began, but they would bog down and drag on for the rest of Truman's days in office. The war in Korea would go on, in the end, taking more than 54,000 American lives. Truman's only comfort was in knowing that he had kept the struggle from spreading, that he had prevented the horror of a full-scale nuclear war.
We hope you've enjoyed our American Experience presentation of Truman. If you did and would like to support this presentation with a $10 gift to Channel 11, just call 1-900-288-1111.